Hey there! This month at the Sweet Potato Block of the Month party, we will be making this block for January. It uses 8 at a time half square triangles and 4 at a time flying geese, and I'll walk you through those steps and how to trim them properly so that you get your points to match well in the block. This month, we're going to use the 8 at a time method to make half square triangles. The pattern has us making 2 sets, each with different sizes. The larger set will start with the 6.5 inch squares and will yield 8 of the 2.5 inch half square triangles with fabric 1 and the background fabric. The other set starts with 4.5 inch squares in fabric 6 and fabric 1 and will yield 8 of the 1.5 inch half square triangles. From each set, take the lighter color fabric and draw 2 diagonal lines across the wrong side of the fabric square. Once you've done that, place the fabric pairs right sides together with the diagonal lines on top, and then sew a seam that is 1/4 inch away from both sides of each of the diagonal lines. Now here they are with seams that are 1/4 inch away from both sides of each diagonal line, and right now they look a little crinkly to me, so I'm going to give these units a quick press at my ironing station and I'll be back. Here they are now looking a bit flatter, so now I'm going to start trimming them. Take your rotary cutter and ruler and cut along each of the diagonal lines to essentially split the units into 4/4 each. Next, it'll be time to cut them in half again. This is where we want to make sure our cut is even and perpendicular to the base of the triangle unit. First, find the intersection of the seams at the top. We will want to make sure that our cut crosses that junction. We also want to cut that as perpendicular to the base of the triangle, and you can make sure that happens when you lay the ruler on top and make sure the horizontal lines run with the bottom edge of the triangle. Once you've found that, make sure the ruler intersects the seams at the top, and then the unit is ready to be cut in half. Repeat this step for each of the bigger triangles to separate the original square into 8 parts. Now that I have 8 pieces from each pair of original squares, I'm going to press them open to get my half square triangles. I'm back from the ironing station, and I do want to mention that my instructions do suggest pressing seams open unless otherwise noted, but when I make half square triangles, I personally typically press my seams toward the darker fabric. Now it's time to trim these half square triangles, and I'm going to show you how I trim them just using a basic ruler and cutting mat. No special tools needed here. These half square triangles need to be trimmed down to 1.5 inches, so the first thing I'll do is look for the 1.5 inch marks from the edges that I'm going to trim from on my ruler. Lay the ruler over the half square triangle and look for the 45-degree angle line to make sure it runs with the seam. There should be some extra fabric hanging out over the edge, and that's the fabric that will be trimmed. Cut along the 2 outer edges with your rotary cutter, and then rotate the half square triangle to trim the other 2 edges. After you've rotated the unit, make sure the edges line up with the inner 1.5 inch markers on the ruler, and the 45-degree angle line will automatically line up with the seam. When you trim along the 2 edges of the ruler, you'll end up with a 1.5 inch half square triangle. Now let me show you how I trim these half square triangles down to 2.5 inches as the pattern requires. The idea is the same as before, but we will just need to find the 2.5 inch markers. Again, match that seam with the diagonal 45-degree angle line while making sure the whole half square triangle fits under those 2.5 inches. Trim along the 2 outer edges of the ruler and then rotate the unit. Line up the inner 2 sides along the 2.5 inch marker lines. Then double check with the 45-degree angle line and trim along the outer 2 edges of the ruler to end up with a 2.5 inch half square triangle. Repeat all of this to end up with 8 of these half square triangles and also 8 of the smaller 1.5 inch half square triangles.